Today we're going to go over the Clack WS1 rebuild and some basic troubleshooting. On the sides of the cover there are two tabs. Pull those and release the cover, pulls forward. Inside the cover is a programming guide. Very simple, not a lot of information, but great for the installer. Not really meant for deep level programming. It also has some information on the bypass. Again, very light duty paperwork, but good information to have. It's kind of a nice feature of the Clack valve. You're going to remove the cables. Make sure you've powered down before you do this. That was the motor cable, power and meter cables, of course. Now you're going to pull up on that tab right there, and that will release the circuit board. Circuit board does pull forward. I'm going to show you a couple minor things for putting it back in later. There is a hole that lines up to a peg right there. Makes it a lot easier if you understand that that does exist to reinstall it later. This is the motor and drivetrain plate. Two tabs, lift up on those slightly, and the whole drivetrain pops off forward and up. Remove the power cable and the meter cable, and that'll release the whole assembly. Fairly simple to remove. Also, the motor can be removed for service. Simply push that tab out and pull the motor out to replace it. This is a 12-volt DC motor, very heavy duty. Very rare that those would need to be replaced, but if it does, a very simple job to do. Now we're going to remove the piston drive assembly. You can use a screwdriver. I'll show you this later in the video. Just kind of wedge it in there and slowly move it to loosen it up. It's actually much easier to use the Clack tool. You'll probably notice that this tool is a much older version. The new tool is a half moon shape instead of a full circle. I've also sped this up quite a bit, just in the interest of time. I'm going to remove this assembly, pull it out. The piston and brine piston will extract out with it. Well, at least normally it does. Sometimes it comes apart in the valve, as you saw there. Just simply pull the piston out, and you're actually going to dispose of that and put a new one in. The whole assembly that's in my hand there should be replaced with a new assembly when this valve gets rebuilt. Also, don't worry about this white gear turning. That's what actually moves the piston in and out. The valve does self-home every time the system powers up. So don't worry about positioning. If it gets out of place, no big deal. A note on the piston assembly. There is a brine piston that's internal on the Clack valve, this black piece here. It simply clicks off, removes, replace that every time. If you are working on a backwashing filter valve, it does not have that. Now we're going to remove the sealant spacer stack assembly on the Clack valves. It is an assembly, a one-piece unit. Notice the ease of removal, but on older valves that have been out in the field for some time, those black rubber seals can get stuck. The internal seals are silicone. The backing plate on the Clack WS1 can also be easily removed. There are two tabs. You would simply pop those in simultaneously, and you would rotate the backing plate counterclockwise. I'm not going to do it in this video, but just kind of showing that if you ever had to remove that, it's a rare item to have to replace. Now we're going to start the valve reassembly. You take a new sealant spacer kit and insert it as shown into the back of the valve. Be sure it seats all the way in there. Then you're going to install a new piston assembly, including the drivetrain and O-rings, etc. As you can see, this assembly here, all parts should be replaced when you rebuild the system. These parts are not expensive. There's the brine piston that clips on as well. That pushes down into the valve. Once you've inserted it and seated to the back, simply tighten it by hand. Then go to use your Clack tool and give it a few turns. Again, I've sped this up slightly. It's very important before you start reassembling. Notice the cable there, it must be in the guides. It tends to fall out. You can do some damage to the cables if you try to put this assembly on without relocating those wires. Again, this goes down to the two bottom clips and snaps into the upper piece up there. Next, you're going to reroute the cables, the power and meter cables, through the guides on the right side of the valve. And then you're going to reinstall the circuit board. Again, remember that little hole that we discussed earlier and the peg on the valve. Those need to line up. There is also a guide on the right side down low that it latches into. It's got to be keyed properly or it will not work. push it into the upper latch, reconnect your cables, and the valve is basically rebuilt. And simply reinstall your main cover. And then next we're going to go over the meter assemblies and the injectors, brine line flow control, and drain line flow control assemblies. The Clack tool does come in handy here again. You can use it to help remove this nut. The nut should be tightened hand tight only, no tool needed to put it back together. A screwdriver, and underneath there's a small wedge point. This meter should pop out with ease. There's an O-ring on there. Be sure to replace that O-ring during services. A quick spin of the turbine. You can look at the circuit board and see if the meter is actually functioning properly. Reassemble it. Put the nut back on. Again, hand tight only, just a little snug. Up top here, that is the brine line assembly. The brine line flow control is housed underneath it. There is an O-ring on that should be replaced every time this valve is serviced. When you rebuild the valve, be sure to replace these auxiliary O-rings. The drain line flow control in this unit is also easily serviced. Again, remove the red clip. There is an O-ring on this as well. This O-ring should be replaced every time the valve gets serviced. The drain line flow control button is the black button inside of the white cage. The button is easily removed with a small screwdriver. And again, this should be replaced probably every 10 to 20 years. It does regulate the flow control. Be sure when you reinstall it that the numbers face the valve. This is a 042, indicating a 4.2 gallon per minute drain line flow control. And simply push the button back in. Again, numbers facing the valve. Push it back in, red clip back into place, and your drain line flow control is now rebuilt. The injector assembly, again, you can use the Clack tool. It does help. Much easier with it. You're going to simply unscrew that, and underneath on the cap is the injector screen. That is easily removed and cleaned. This cap also has an O-ring on it. It should be replaced when the valve is rebuilt as well. Removing and cleaning the injector is also quite easy. Just a small pair of pliers and pull out on it, lift straight up. I'll change camera angles here in a moment. These are easily replaced. The color of this injector does indicate what size of tank it is designed for. Refer to the manual for more information on it. And this is a view from above. Again, just simply pull that out. You notice there's an up and a down location for the injectors as well. You would change this for upflow or downflow water softener valve. Now you would reinstall the cap. The letter E indicates the injector size that is under the cap. If you change the injector to a different size, simply remove that sticker so you don't fool the next technician. As mentioned earlier, the Clack tool is not necessary. It is helpful. I'm going to show you in a little bit of detail here. The notches in the backing plate line up to the notches in the drive cam assembly, the piston assembly. So when that is in place, I'm not going to tighten up too much just to show you. You simply put a screwdriver in there and wedge it and turn it. That'll allow you to loosen it without trying to get a big pair of pliers in there, possibly doing damage to the assembly. Once it's loose, you would simply remove it by hand. Another unique feature on this valve is the optical positioning. Notice right there is the optical sensor. It actually looks down into that hole, into a gear set that has reflective tape. I'm going to remove those. It is a gear reduction set to slow down the speed of the motor. Right there, you notice all three gears are identical, so there is no right or wrong way to install them. As long as the tape is out, the reflective tape, they can go in any position. Simply reassemble them. These I've never seen go bad, but I'm sure they could. Very simple to replace and to maintain even those gear sets. If you had to replace the three gears, as I just showed you, you just simply snap them into the cage. That cage snaps right into the main drivetrain assembly, the motor housing, etc. Snaps back into place, and you have basically rebuilt the drivetrain. I hope this Clack WS1 tutorial was informative and helpful. Thanks for watching.